When it came time to decide what I was going to study, I decided to get my degree in economics. Reading this single book has had more actual impact on my life than that entire degree. Along with Benjamin Graham, Warren Buffett, Charlie Munger, and many others, Peter Lynch's wisdom set me up to retire in my 20s, something I didn't even know was possible when I first started on this journey. Peter didn't have to share his wisdom, but he did, and for that, I'm eternally grateful to him. Most people should just contribute to a low-cost index fund like the S&P 500 on a consistent basis, forget about it, and just live their life. However, if somebody were interested in learning more about investing and I had to recommend only one book, it would have to be One Up on Wall Street by Peter Lynch. The following are some of my favorite lessons from the book. 1. Economic predictions are garbage, and most quote-unquote experts have no idea what they're talking about. Going back to my degree in economics, I consider it largely useless. There hasn't been a single business or investing decision I've ever made based on some broad economic factor. Consider for a simple example this YouTube channel. When I started this channel, I did not think about whether I should start or not based on what the M1 money supply was or some other nonsensical factor. I thought a lot about how my videos sucked and what I could do to make them suck a little less over time. This is how every real business owner thinks, and as explained by Benjamin Graham, if you're an owner of a stock, you are a business owner. No good business owner thinks about next year's M1 money supply. They think about things that are relevant and also in their control, like how they can improve their product, as an example. Furthermore, not only are most economic data useless, but the ones that could be useful also happen to be almost impossible to consistently predict correctly. We have quote-unquote experts predicting crashes every year for a decade straight, and once it does finally happen, they tell us, "I told you so." John Kenneth Galbraith summarized this perfectly. He said, "There are two kinds of forecasters, those who don't know, and those who don't know they don't know." These so-called experts and economists, along with their predictions, should largely be ignored or simply treated as entertainment and enjoyed for their overly dramatic fortune-telling. In fact, this is probably disrespectful to fortune tellers because a good fortune teller will over time pick up on the basic patterns of human psychology and will therefore have a much higher accuracy of predicting the future than an economist. 2. Know what you own, you have an edge. I constantly find myself having an urge to dabble in things I don't understand. It can actually be quite irritating and requires a good amount of self-awareness so that I don't give in. You should be able to explain to a child, relatively quickly and easily, what every business that you own does. It's quite fascinating to see people own businesses where they have no idea what the business actually does, but it's much more common than you'd think. Like Warren Buffett has reiterated many times, the size of your circle of competence does not matter, only that you stay inside it. Like I already said, most people should probably just index, but if you're going to own individual stocks, you have to ask yourself a simple common sense question. What do you bring to the investing table that other people don't? This is the only way you could create any sort of advantage. It cannot simply be looking at a ratio like price to earnings. Everybody has instant access to that. It cannot be analyzing some balance sheet in some simplistic way. Again, anyone can do that. You don't even need a human to do it. Even a spreadsheet can automatically calculate those values. You have to bring special insight that most participants in the market lack. Otherwise, there's no reason to buy individual stocks, and one should simply index. But let me give you an easy example of what I mean by special insight, an edge that I could possibly bring to the market. I've been using Adobe software for about 2 decades now. That is an incredible edge. Looking at 13F filings with the SEC, I find that a famous investor, Chuck Akre, also holds some Adobe in his fund. Now, I have tremendous respect for Chuck Akre. I've in fact learned a lot from this man, and I love his philosophy of investing. If Chuck and I were the only 2 participants in the market, he would wipe the floor with me in many aspects. But the nice thing about investing is that I can pick only what I want to compete in, what Warren Buffett refers to as no-called strikes. So when it comes to Adobe, even for an exceptional investor like Chuck Akre, I guarantee you he probably couldn't even articulate the difference between what Adobe Premiere Pro does and what Adobe After Effects does. If you were to ask him what people use Adobe Audition for, he probably couldn't tell you. Now, how are you supposed to determine the moat, let's say, of a business, when you don't even really understand what the product does? And how are you supposed to stay in the loop when you don't even use the product on a consistent basis? And there's a big difference in quote-unquote understanding by reading about Adobe in an annual report, as opposed to using it consistently for 2 decades and having it as part of your daily workflow. It's like a person who has spent 20 years in a gym, as opposed to a person who has never stepped inside a gym, but read about the different machines that are supposedly in there. Those are 2 very different definitions of understanding, and I wouldn't even consider the latter understanding at all. Why is it that I pay Adobe too much money that I would like to stop paying, and I can't? If the moat starts to diminish, I'll be able to see it almost instantaneously because I'm around it every day. But when will the news get to Chuck Akre as the numbers slowly trickle into the quarterly reports? These are the sorts of questions that will give you an edge, not simply doing a little math to get to the return on invested capital or the margins on Adobe and concluding that somehow, for some reason, Adobe seems to be a great business. Now, most quote-unquote professional investors have nothing in common with someone like Chuck Akre. Chuck is considered the cream of the crop. Most professional investors are in fact worse than useless, making millions in fees to underperform a simple click on a buy button for an index. What's even more irritating is how they call themselves smart money. There's nothing smart about trying to truly understand and keep up with Adobe through Adobe's quarterly and annual reports. In fact, you can think of most of these charlatans as a bunch of virgins poring over female anatomy charts all day thinking they're some sort of modern-day Casanovas. I'll give you another example. I was recently listening to an interview with Bruce Greenwald, a man widely considered to be one of the biggest investing intellectuals. In describing Adobe in a single sentence, he said, and I quote, "Adobe does fonts and video processing." Anybody who has used Adobe products for even a month could easily tell that Bruce has no idea what he's talking about. Not a single person who actually uses Adobe products would describe Adobe as doing fonts and video processing. And again, please remember, this is a man that taught probably the most famous class on investing in the world, taught the likes of legendary investors like Li Lu, and is heavily endorsed by people like Warren Buffett. This is not to be disrespectful to Bruce. On the contrary, Bruce is one of the smartest people in the world. The point that I'm trying to make here is that even the smartest people in the world that have dedicated their entire lives to business and investing are just as out of touch and have no idea what they're talking about when it comes to some of the biggest software companies in the world, for example. Now, to be fair, dumb money also makes unnecessarily stupid mistakes, often having to do with temperamental issues, for example. But it's worth reiterating that smart money isn't as smart as some people make it out to be, and dumb money doesn't have to be as dumb as it sometimes is. You probably have an edge in an isolated field that could give you an advantage, whether it be related to your work or hobbies or something else. Just think of someone who's a gamer, for example, and how much of an advantage they would have in the real understanding of gaming trends compared to some out-of-touch 70-year-old on Wall Street reading an annual report after the shifts have already taken place. It is important to remember, however, that one should be careful to not waste this edge with not being able to manage emotions, straying out of one's circle of competence, not understanding the very basics of accounting, paying any price for a business as long as it's a good business, and many other common mistakes. 3. There's always something to worry about. Along with the doomsday economists, the media directly profits from causing daily anxiety with their headlines. In fact, it's basic psychology that people hate losing more than they like gaining. So the headlines tell us daily that the world is ending and we must click to find out why so that they can generate advertising revenue. This is why it's important to read higher quality material, and especially history, because it puts it all in perspective. If you looked at the pandemic rhetoric, for example, you'd think that this was the worst thing that had ever happened and the world was coming to an end. Well, of course, a simple glance at modern history shows us that there was literally a world war just a little while ago where a nuclear bomb was used. Now, I don't know about you, but if long-term investing continued just fine with that, I'm not sure that I would put this pandemic in some category of, oh my god, this is the worst thing that's ever happened. Consuming history regularly from high-quality sources is probably one of the best things you can do in general, but also for your investing ability. Much better than building imaginary discounted cash flows in Excel all day. 4. Stocks go up and down. If you can't handle it, do not buy stocks. Peter Lynch used to say that the most important organ in investing is the stomach, not the brain. Some people just can't handle it for whatever reason and give in to panic and abandon their entire plan at the first sign of trouble. If that's the case, again, one should follow an indexing approach, or if even that's too much, one should simply avoid stocks completely. It'll be detrimental to any long-term financial health, but it's probably at least better than psychotically buying and selling at exactly the wrong times. To an investor who knows what they're doing, volatility is a great thing. If you liked a stock at 100 and had a good reason why you thought it was a good investment, why wouldn't you like it even better at 70? It simply allows us to buy more for even cheaper and make even more money. The problem usually stems from people panicking because they didn't have a good reason for buying it in the first place, and now they don't know what to do with it. It's easy to observe something similar with exercise. If getting better at pull-ups were linear, so that the first day you got 1, second day you got 2, third day you got 3, and so on, I don't think anyone would have a hard time sticking to their routine. But you don't find these nice linear progressions with anything in nature. The hardest part is sticking to the process when you finally hit 10 pull-ups, and then you drop down, and for a few weeks, you seem to be getting 7s and 8s. Stocks are no different. You have to pick a plan that makes sense, just like you have to pick a pull-up routine that makes sense. But after that, be able to trust the process through the ups, downs, and sometimes long plateaus. 5. Diversification. When I picked to study economics, I did not pick 99 other fields to diversify and stay safe. When I picked to learn to play the piano, I did not pick 99 other instruments just in case the piano went out of style or something. When I started this YouTube channel, I did not also start 99 other channels just in case this one didn't work out. The channel's already bad enough. Imagine how bad things would be if I dabbled in 99 other channels at the same time. I mean, I can just go on and on, but this idea of weirdly extreme diversification is not something we do with anything else when we strive for great results. Now, don't get me wrong. If somebody's daddy left them $100 million and they're planning on cruising for the rest of their life, sure, diversify like crazy. Even 5% on that is $5 million of income every year. But for the rest of us who have started with nothing and want to build it into something, and especially if we have deep business interest and ability, and importantly, given that we're not delusional about that, it's insane to diversify like the guy cruising through life with daddy's 100 million. The purposelessness of that type of life has a decent chance of ending in a drug overdose for our quote-unquote lucky friend, but I digress. Now, of course it is the case that everyone on Wall Street managing other people's money also diversifies like crazy. Imagine making $20 million a year, let's do a simple 2% on $1 billion of managed money, for being useless and adding zero value and in fact, most often destroying value. Of course you're not going to want to mess that up, so you simply recreate a slightly smaller, differently packaged S&P 500 index for your clients and make your $20 million a year. But apart from situations like that, and again, emphasizing extreme business interest and ability, and that's a big if, why would you diversify? If we take Benjamin Graham's idea that you're a business owner when you own a stock, how many business owners do you know in real life that own 100 businesses? I don't know a single good business owner like that. Most actually own just one, or maybe a handful, and do phenomenally well in life. And going back to the idea that you have to bring special insights to the market to have an advantage, how many companies can you realistically do that with? I have spent my entire life being fascinated by business. It's basically what I do all day, and I can bring that advantage to maybe a handful of companies. Think about that. There's something like 50,000 stocks in the world, and after a lifetime of study, I only have a good understanding of maybe a handful of them. I basically understand 0% of business in the world. Now granted, I'm setting a high standard for what understanding means, but it's to avoid sounding like Bruce Greenwald if I were asked about Burlington Northern Santa Fe, for example. If I were describing BNSF like Bruce described Adobe, it would sound something like, BNSF does trains and railroads and stuff like that. In fact, that probably describes BNSF better than doing fonts and video processing does Adobe. Anyway, so now I'm supposed to sell my Adobe and take half of it and buy some Chinese company to diversify and stay safe, where I have no edge, where I don't understand the business as well as others, where I don't understand China as well as others. It makes no sense. In an imaginary scenario where you could buy companies that are equally great, at equally great prices, with perfectly equal understanding of them, sure, we could all just diversify. But that doesn't really happen in real life. It's extremely hard to find phenomenal companies at right prices and that you also happen to understand really well at the same time. Therefore, when you do get rare opportunities like that, you must seize them and concentrate heavily, instead of what Peter Lynch would call diversifying. In summary, I think Peter Lynch was pretty optimistic about what the average person can do in the market. It's easy to look around and see that many people buying individual stocks keep causing unnecessary harm to themselves. I do maintain, just like Warren Buffett has reiterated many times, that most people should probably just buy something like the S&P 500 on a consistent basis and call it a day. But if you find yourself waking up and going to sleep with thoughts about different businesses in the world and how the world operates and changes, if you're extremely curious and find yourself asking everyone around you about products and services they use and why they like them, whether they're 6 years old or 60 years old, if you go to Chipotle and you're more excited about observing human behavior there than getting your burrito, then you might be infected by a bug that could make you very wealthy. Now that simply needs to be honed through a lifetime of endless curiosity and study.